These are the families that quietly own Aspen, and the stories get wilder as we climb. We're talking about a hedge fund billionaire who bought a Saudi prince's 56,000 square foot palace, a mother who handed her son her retirement savings and accidentally became one of the richest women alive, and one family that doesn't own a house on the mountain because they own the entire mountain in Aspen. Let's get into it. Number 8. The Lauder family. Let's kick the countdown off with the woman who inherited the most famous name in American beauty and then had to work out what to do with it. Erin Lauder is the granddaughter of Estee Lauder, the woman who started mixing face creams in a kitchen in Queens and built one of the great cosmetics empires on Earth. And growing up as Estee's granddaughter came with a very specific kind of pressure, because she has talked openly about how her grandmother was the family's whole gravitational center. Estee taught her about presentation, about how a room should look, about the fact that beauty was never really about the product but about the feeling around it. Erin spent years inside the family company as a creative director before doing the thing that heirs rarely manage, which is building something with her own name on it. In 2012, she launched Erin, her own lifestyle and beauty brand, and it worked. She is estimated to be worth in the region of $2 to $3 billion, and she carries what the family calls the third generation, which in dynasty terms is the generation that usually loses it. And she is a genuine fixture of the Aspen social season, which matters more than it sounds. Erin Lauder Zinterhofer appears on the list of billionaires who own property in Pitkin County, and the Aspen she participates in is the old one. Not the crypto money Aspen or the private jet for the weekend Aspen, but the version built around the Aspen Institute, the food and wine classic, the charity circuit, the dinners where the guest list matters more than the menu. Because there are really two Aspens operating on the same square mileage. There's the one that shows up for a long weekend in a rented Gulfstream and posts about it, and there's the one that has been coming for 40 years, knows which houses changed hands and why, and would never mention any of it publicly. The Lauders are firmly in the second one. Erin's Aspen is about taste and who's at the table, but about 7 minutes north of her, somebody bought 95 acres and a palace built for a Saudi prince. Number 7. The Paulson family. In 2006, the most expensive home listed for sale in the entire United States was a ranch just outside Aspen, and it belonged to Prince Bandar bin Sultan, the Saudi ambassador to the United States. It was called Hala Ranch, and the numbers are almost comic. 95 acres. A main house of roughly 56,000 square feet with 15 bedrooms and 16 bathrooms. Mahogany and bronze and stained glass throughout. A commercial kitchen, a heated hay barn, stables, a racquetball court, a fishing pond, its own water treatment plant and its own gas pumps, because when you're a Saudi prince in the Rocky Mountains, you would rather not rely on anybody else's infrastructure. He listed it for $135 million. And interestingly enough, it sat there for 6 years. And then in 2012, John Paulson bought it, along with a neighboring 38-acre property called Bear Ranch, for around $49 million for both. Paulson is the hedge fund manager who made one of the most famous trades in financial history, betting against the American subprime mortgage market before the 2008 crash and making billions when it collapsed. Which means the man who profited from the housing crash bought the most expensive house in America at roughly a third of its asking price. There's a certain symmetry there. What he's done with it since is the interesting part, because he could have subdivided it, which is what almost everybody in that market does with large parcels. He didn't. He kept the ranch at full scale, preserved the trail systems and the wildlife corridors and the river frontage, and renamed it Star Ranch after the Starwood area it sits in. In a valley where land this size is now essentially impossible to obtain, holding it intact is its own statement. Paulson bought a palace and left the land alone. Now, what does it take to break Aspen's all-time price record? Number 6. The Wynn family. $108 million. For 4 acres. That's the number Steve Wynn paid on Red Mountain, and it set the record for the most expensive residential sale in Aspen history. 4 acres. Not a ranch, not an estate with its own postcode, just 4 acres of very good hillside with a view of Aspen Mountain. Wynn is the man who essentially built modern Las Vegas. The Mirage, Treasure Island, Bellagio, Wynn, and Encore, The whole architecture of the Strip as a luxury destination rather than a gambling town is substantially his design, and he did it with an aesthetic obsessiveness that became legendary in the industry, right down to personally selecting the art on the walls. And that purchase tells you something important about how Aspen actually works now, because Wynn is exactly the kind of buyer the old guard watches carefully. He arrived with enormous money made loudly in an industry built on spectacle, and he bought at a number that reset the entire market above him. Every seller on that mountain now has a new reference point, which is precisely why longtime residents get uneasy about single transactions like this one. Speaking of the kind of vision that can reset an entire market, there's a program someone on our team has been curious about called the Billionaire Brain Wave. It's a simple 7-minute audio built around theta brainwave research, the deep focus brain state linked to where big creative ideas come from. You put on headphones once a day, usually with your morning coffee, and that's the whole routine. It's a one-time $39. It comes with bonus guides on money habits and investing basics, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. So testing it costs you nothing if it's not for you. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to Aspen and the slope where every one of these fortunes ends up. It's worth understanding what Red Mountain is, since it keeps coming up. It sits just across the Roaring Fork River from downtown, close enough to walk in, high enough to see everything, and it has been the most valuable residential ground in Aspen for decades. Locals call it Billionaire Mountain, and Forbes once wrote that its phone book reads like a Davos guest list. Undeveloped lots up there have sold for over $24 million with nothing on them at all. Wynn's arrival was about as loud as an Aspen purchase gets. The German who lives a few streets over has spent 30 years making sure nobody notices him at all. Number 5. The Plattner family. Hasso Plattner is one of the wealthiest people in Europe and one of the quietest names on Red Mountain, and both of those things are deliberate. In 1972, he and 4 colleagues walked out of IBM in Germany and started a company called SAP. What they built became the software backbone of global business, the enterprise resource planning systems that run the supply chains, payrolls, inventories, and accounts of an enormous share of the world's largest corporations. You have never used SAP, and you interact with things it manages every single day. It is invisible by design, and so, largely, is he. His Aspen presence has been established for decades, and it belongs to a specific category of the town's population that people underestimate, which is the European industrial and tech money that arrived quietly, bought well, and never made itself part of the social story. No records broken, no listings in the paper, just a house on the best mountain in town, held for a very long time. And that's a genuine dividing line in Aspen. There are the people whose purchases become news, and there are the ones whose purchases only become visible years later when somebody goes through the county assessor's records. Aspen Journalism, the local investigative outfit, has actually had to do exactly that work, going through property records to verify which billionaires hold what, because a substantial number of these homes sit inside trusts and limited liability companies with names that reveal nothing. Plattner keeps his fortune deliberately invisible. A few streets away, a Walmart heiress has been doing something quieter still, which is buying the neighborhood one house at a time. Number 4. The Kroenke family. Ann Walton. Kroenke is a Walmart heiress. Her father was Bud Walton, brother of Sam, and co-founder of the company, which means the money underneath her is one of the largest retail fortunes ever created, and she's estimated in the region of $10 billion. Her husband is Stan Kroenke, who owns what is genuinely one of the great sports empires in the world. The Los Angeles Rams, the Denver Nuggets, the Colorado Avalanche, the Colorado Rapids, Arsenal Football Club in London. That's an NFL franchise, an NBA franchise, an NHL franchise, and one of the biggest clubs in English football held by one household. On Ridge Road on Red Mountain, they own an estate with an 11,000 square foot main house, a separate guest house, and a wine cellar holding around 1,600 bottles. And what's notable about the Kroenkes in Aspen is the pattern rather than any single purchase, because they've been characterized by quiet consolidation, adding adjacent property over time rather than announcing themselves with one enormous transaction. That's the old money method, and it's worth spelling out, because it's the opposite of the win approach. You don't buy the trophy and take the record. You buy the house next door, and then eventually the one after that, and 20 years later you look up and realize a single family controls an entire ridge without anybody having written a headline about it. And here's where I have to stop and tell you what's actually happening in this town, because the numbers underneath all of this are genuinely startling. Aspen has a population of roughly 7,000 people. Something in the region of 75 billionaires either live there or own property there. The median household income is around $73,000 a year. The median single-family home price is well over $10 million. Sit with that gap for a second, because it is not a normal housing market, it's a different species entirely. And the town has spent nearly 50 years fighting it. The Aspen-Pitkin County Housing Authority was established in 1982, the first workforce housing agency in Colorado, and it now manages more than 3,100 deed-restricted units, making it the largest program of its kind at any mountain resort in North America. Teachers, nurses, chefs, police officers, and ski patrollers live in it, because otherwise they simply could not live within 45 minutes of their own jobs. There's a joke locals tell that isn't really a joke. In Aspen, the billionaires ran out the millionaires. Which brings us to a real question that people in that valley argue about constantly. Who actually runs this place? The elected council? Or the handful of families who own the land, the lifts, the hotels, and most of the ground the town is built on? Hold that thought, because the answer is coming. The Kronk is by the neighborhood quietly. Number 3 built the loudest brand in American retail and then spent decades trying to disappear behind it. Number 3, the Wexner family. Les Wexner borrowed $5,000 from his aunt in 1963 and opened a single clothing store. What grew out of that was one of the most dominant retail empires in American history, because Wexner was the man behind the Limited, Express, Abercrombie, and Fitch, Bath and Body Works, and above all Victoria's Secret, which he bought in 1982 for a reported $1 million when it was a small failing chain and turned into a multi-billion-dollar global brand. His fortune has been measured in the region of $9 billion, and he holds a home on Red Mountain, where he's been part of the landscape for years. But the more interesting figure in that household, and the one people in philanthropy circles actually talk about, is Abigail Wexner. She's a lawyer by training, she ran the family's foundation, and she spent years as chair of the board of Nationwide Children's Hospital, steering an enormous institutional expansion. She has built a serious independent record in her own right, rather than functioning as an appendage to his, which in a generation of retail wives was genuinely unusual. In the interest of being straight with you, no honest account of Wexner skips the fact that for roughly 2 decades, his personal fortune was managed by Jeffrey Epstein, an association he has publicly said he came to regret, and that ended in 2007. It's a permanent shadow over the legacy, and it would be dishonest to leave it out. What's left in Aspen is a family whose name is on almost nothing locally and whose presence on that mountain is simply understood. Wexner built brands that put his products into practically every mall in America while keeping his own face almost entirely out of it. Wexner made his fortune by understanding exactly what people want to buy. Number 2 made theirs with 2 checks and a conversation that lasted about 2 minutes. Number 2, the Bezos family. On Willoughby Way, on Red Mountain, there's a house belonging to Miguel and Jackie Bezos. Not Jeff, his parents. And their story is the one I genuinely want you to remember from this whole video, because it starts about as far from a billionaire mountain as it's possible to get. Jacqueline Geese was 17 years old and still in high school when she had Jeff, a pregnant teenager in 1964, in a world that had already written her off, and she has said the school initially didn't even want her to stay enrolled. Her first marriage ended within 2 years. She raised her son largely alone before she met a Cuban immigrant named Miguel Bezos, who had arrived in America at 16 with essentially nothing, and who adopted Jeff and gave him his surname. Then in 1995, their 30-year-old son came to them with an idea about selling books on the internet and told them plainly that there was a 70% chance they would lose everything they put in. They handed him the bulk of their retirement savings, 2 checks, totaling $245,573 for 6% of the company. Jackie's line about it afterwards is one of the great sentences in American business. She said they talked about it for 2 minutes, and that they didn't invest in Amazon, they invested in Jeff. Bloomberg has estimated that stake grew to be worth as much as $30 billion, which is a return of roughly 12 million%, and quite possibly the single most successful venture investment ever made by anyone. And what they did with it is the part that belongs in an Aspen story. Through the Bezos Family Foundation, they spent decades funding education, quietly, long before their son or his company had any philanthropic operation at all. In 2022, they gave $710 million to a Seattle Cancer Research Center. And in 2024, they gave $185.7 million to the Aspen Institute, which is the intellectual heart of that town and the single institution most responsible for Aspen being something more than a ski resort. Jackie Bezos died in 2025, at 78, after living with Lewy body dementia for 5 years. Her son wrote publicly about the ferocious teenage mother who, in his words, pounced on the job of loving him. A 17-year-old who was told her life was over ended up one of the wealthiest women in the world, with a house on Billionaire Mountain and her name on the institution at the center of the town. Everybody on this list so far bought a house in Aspen. One family bought the mountain. Number 1. The Crown family. Here's the thing almost nobody outside Colorado realizes. Aspen isn't one ski mountain, it's 4. Aspen Mountain, Aspen Highlands, Buttermilk, and Snowmass. And all 4 of them belong to a single family from Chicago. The Crown family owns the Aspen Skiing Company outright, not a stake in it, all of it. They bought half in 1985 and took full ownership in 1993, and they've held it ever since. That company employs around 3,600 people at the peak of the ski season, making it the largest employer in the valley by a wide margin, and it also runs the Little Nell and the Limelight hotels. If you have ever taken a lift in Aspen, eaten on that mountain, or slept at the base of it, you have paid this family. And the fortune underneath it didn't come from snow at all. It started in 1919 with Henry Crown, the son of a sweatshop worker, who founded a building materials company in Chicago selling sand and gravel. That business merged with General Dynamics in 1959, and the family still holds roughly 10% of one of the largest defense contractors in the world. They also own half of Alterra Mountain Company, which controls 19 more ski destinations, including Deer Valley and Steamboat, and operates the Icon Pass. So the family that owns Aspen also owns a chunk of American skiing generally, and a chunk of the American defense industry, from a base that began with gravel. But this is a story about a family, and in June of 2023, that family lost the man who was running it. Jim Crown was the chief executive of Henry Crown & Company, and the managing partner of the ski company, and he was the chairman emeritus of the board of the Aspen Institute, which means he sat at the exact intersection of the town's commercial power and its intellectual life. He was driving at the Aspen Motorsports Park in Woody Creek when he hit an impact barrier. He died of multiple blunt force trauma. It was his 70th birthday. The Aspen Ideas Festival was running in town that very week. The family asked for privacy and the Valley, for once, gave it to them. His wife, Paula, is an artist of real standing in her own right, and the two of them had hosted Michelle Obama at their home at the foot of Buttermilk. His father, Lester, who is now well into his 90s, sat as chairman of the whole operation for decades, and he and his wife, Renee, raised 7 children, most of whom took roles somewhere across the businesses or the philanthropy. After Jim's death, his brother Stephen stepped in as co-chief executive alongside a cousin. That is the 4th generation now holding a company started with sand and gravel in 1919. And the succession question hanging over that valley is not an abstract one, because whoever ends up controlling the Aspen Skiing Company effectively controls the economy of an entire county. And the family knows exactly how that looks, which is why their executives keep turning up at town council meetings in Snowmass and Aspen to answer for it. They've talked publicly about 3 straight years of declining skier visits, about a business under pressure across all 4 mountains, and about the housing problem most of all. Their own chief executive said publicly that the valley is around 5,000 housing units short, and that it's the issue they get the most pushback on. The company houses around 1,300 of its own employees and says it needs hundreds more beds within the next decade, partly because 37% of its workforce is heading toward retirement in place. So back to the question, who actually runs Aspen? The council passes the ordinances, But one family owns the 4 mountains, the biggest hotels, the largest payroll in the valley, and half the passes that get people through the gates. They don't sit on Billionaire Mountain looking at the view. They own the view, and they've owned it for 40 years. And that's the real map of Aspen, a town of 7,000 people, 75 billionaires, a median income of $73,000, and a median home price north of $10 million, all balanced on 4 mountains that belong to one family from Chicago. What strikes me most, though, is how little of this is about the houses. It's about a teenage mother who gave her son her retirement fund, a granddaughter carrying the 3rd generation of a name she didn't choose, a widow and a father in his 90s working out who takes the company next. Behind every one of these fortunes is a family arguing about the same things every family does, just with considerably more at stake. So which one got you? The hedge funder in the Saudi prince's palace, the mother whose 2-minute conversation turned into $30 billion, or the family that quietly bought all 4 mountains and never said a word about it? Drop it in the comments, and subscribe to Global Status for more deep dives into the world that doesn't make the headlines but absolutely runs the show.